It was early autumn in New York, around 1998. The city's central hospital bustled with people throughout the week, especially in the morning hours when patients arrived from various parts of the region. That was precisely when, just before 7 o'clock, a 10-year-old girl walked through the glass doors, visibly exhausted and cradling a baby swaddled in a worn-out blanket. She looked like she had walked for blocks. Her clothes were dirty, and her shoes had small tears at the seams. At first, some staff members were puzzled by the sight of a child alone with an infant. A receptionist, used to all sorts of situations, thought it could be an older sister bringing a newborn for a routine check. However, the moment she noticed the girl's anxious stare and the firm way she held the baby, the receptionist realized there was something far more serious going on. A head nurse, making her rounds in the lobby, intervened and asked the girl to sit on a nearby bench. Her tone was gentle yet authoritative as she tried to calm her down. The girl stayed silent for a few seconds, looking around as if trying to spot an exit or a hiding place. When she finally spoke, her words came out in a tense whisper. Only a few people nearby managed to hear her clearly, but they were shocked by what little they understood. The girl claimed the baby was her brother. More than that, she hinted there was something terrible happening at home. Before the nurse could probe further, the baby began to cry desperately, throwing the girl into a near panic. That was when a pediatrician, who had just arrived for her shift, noticed what was going on and quickly guided them into a private examination room. Not knowing the full story, the hospital staff rushed to check the baby. They could tell it was only a few days old, underfed, and covered in bruises. Concern grew as the girl explained she had no idea where her parents were. She also insisted the baby would be in danger if returned to them, although she didn't elaborate, only stressing she couldn't go back. By this point, doctors and nurses exchanged glances, trying to make sense of the situation. One of the first steps was to call social services and the police, given the potential abuse of a minor. Yet, one question lingered. How did a 10-year-old manage to carry a newborn all the way to the hospital? And why was she so convinced it couldn't be handed back to the family? While waiting for the social worker to arrive, the pediatrician asked gently where the girl had come from and how she had obtained the baby. All the child would say was that she needed to protect him. She didn't seem fully aware of the seriousness of the situation, but her expression revealed she had gone through considerable trouble to get there. Her dark hair was tied haphazardly, her face was stained with tears, and dark circles under her eyes hinted she might not have slept in days. When the social worker eventually arrived, she began gathering as many details as possible. The girl spoke only in fragments, yet enough to amplify the staff's worry. She mentioned a house in a poor neighborhood and implied the baby wasn't adopted legally, nor was a relative's child. Even more puzzling was the confidence with which she insisted that the newborn belonged to someone important, but not necessarily in a parental sense. Despite being so young, she seemed convinced powerful forces were in play, though she couldn't articulate it clearly. When the police got there, they approached with natural skepticism. It was highly unusual for a 10-year-old to arrive clutching a newborn and speaking of hidden dangers. But upon examining the baby's condition, officers realized this was not a trivial matter. The pediatrician confirmed bruises and signs of possible mistreatment, which made it abundantly clear something serious was going on. The officers decided to figure out where the girl had come from, locate her parents or guardians, and confirm whether the baby was truly at risk. Later that same morning, the girl was given clean clothes and was shown to a quiet area where she could eat and rest. She clung to the baby the entire time, refusing to place him in a makeshift crib in the ward. Some hospital staff assured her that he would be safe, but she was adamant about keeping him in her arms, as though afraid he'd be taken away the second she let go. Meanwhile, the police discovered very little from official records. The girl's name was found in a local school's registration, but she hadn't shown up to classes for almost a week. Asked indirectly why she hadn't been in school, she muttered something about an urgent task without providing a full explanation. No relatives could be reached with the scant information she offered, and the investigation ran into puzzling contradictions. Despite being only 10, she spoke with remarkable determination about a secret she couldn't fully divulge, appearing terrified of being overheard. The situation took another complicated turn when, the following day, word spread through hospital corridors that a wealthy elderly couple had contacted the administration, claiming they were the rightful guardians of the baby. They accused the girl of kidnapping the child from their home. Rumor had it this couple was extremely influential in business circles and had connections with powerful people in the city. Their lawyer had apparently called, demanding that the hospital hand over the baby at once, without further questions. The threatening undertone of that call alarmed many staff members. Up to that point, no one had imagined the baby might belong to a wealthy family. The newborn's simple blanket and obvious malnourishment didn't match a lavish upbringing. Besides, how could a 10-year-old girl be connected to a couple so well off they had high-powered attorneys? The mystery piqued the curiosity of some reporters who occasionally lurked around the hospital looking for stories. However, staff were reminded to keep things confidential, as the safety of the minors was the main priority, not media coverage. Despite all this, one question prevailed. For the doctors and police, why was the child so determined the baby must not be released? She kept repeating that it would be dangerous, though no one knew exactly what threat she was referring to. Yet her conviction made officials wonder if the true story was even more complex than they first assumed. For now, the baby remained in the hospital under the watchful eye of the pediatric team, and the girl refused to leave his side. Word soon reached them that the wealthy couple was on their way, supposedly to claim legal custody. The police and social workers geared up for a complicated standoff. They needed to figure out who these people really were, how the newborn ended up in the care of a 10-year-old, and why the infant's physical condition was so fragile. Meanwhile, the social worker tried to ensure the child's rights were protected, but it was challenging to decide if the girl herself needed protection or if she was involved in something shady. As visiting hours crept closer, tension filled the air. All that was clear was that the girl insisted she couldn't reveal much more, but had dropped a cryptic statement. "This baby is much more than just a baby." Her grim tone troubled everyone who heard it, making them wonder if it was merely a child's imagination, or if there really was a dark past lurking behind this infant. One thing was certain: the arrival of that wealthy couple would be a turning point, and if the girl's fears were valid, handing over the baby to them might be the worst possible outcome. Yet authorities could not simply let a 10-year-old decide the fate of a newborn. A delicate and volatile predicament was brewing, poised to explode at any moment. Early the next day, the hospital was tense. Everyone knew the wealthy couple might arrive at any moment. Rumor had it they owned several companies in the area, boasted powerful contacts, and could easily put pressure on authorities. It didn't take long for that rumor to be confirmed. A dark limousine pulled up outside, and from it stepped a couple, who looked to be in their 70s. Their elegance clashed sharply with the cold, sterile atmosphere of the hospital lobby. Right there at reception, the man's stern tone immediately turned heads. He demanded to speak with the hospital director, making it clear he had ties to the board of trustees and would not settle for normal visitor procedures. The unnerved receptionist guided him to an administrative office, where 2 police officers and the case's social worker were already gathered. It became obvious from the couple's composure and commanding presence that they intended to take the baby home with them at all costs. Meanwhile, in a small makeshift room, the 10-year-old girl sat beside the infant's crib. She grew more and more anxious, flinching every time footsteps echoed in the hallway. Occasionally, staff urged her to step out for a short break, perhaps to eat or stretch her legs, but she stubbornly refused to leave the newborn's side. Exhaustion was evident in her eyes, yet she stayed alert, as though sensing danger was close. When the wealthy couple finally confronted hospital staff, the tension soared. The elderly man demanded that doctors immediately release his grandson. To him, he offered no explanation about the baby's battered condition, nor why the infant had been found in the care of a 10-year-old. The attorney accompanying him backed up his demand, accusing the girl of kidnapping. One police officer tried to intervene calmly, stating that no confirmed evidence supported their family claim yet, and that the child's health was still precarious. Thus, the baby would remain in the hospital for a while longer. Suddenly, the little girl's voice cut through the tension. Even though it was shaking, it carried a surprising resolve, as she insisted this couple had no rightful claim to the child. The man glared at her in disdain, calling her a vagrant who had no say in the matter. This exchange made the stark contrast. Clear, on one side stood a frightened yet determined child, unwilling to release the newborn. On the other, an influential older couple, flanked by lawyers, who believed their word was law. Caught in the middle, the social worker and the medical staff tried to negotiate a temporary arrangement. They suggested a DNA test be performed to verify any biological link between the couple and the baby. Meanwhile, the infant would stay at the hospital under careful supervision. Reluctantly, the couple's lawyer agreed, on condition that security measures be put in place so the girl wouldn't run away with the child again. He even suggested the girl be sent to a juvenile facility until things became clearer. Once more, the police stepped in, pointing out that there was no solid proof of an actual abduction. At the same time, there was no documentation showing the girl had legal guardianship. In the end, they reached a compromise. The baby would remain in the hospital with the girl nearby, but under careful watch. Although the couple fumed at the delay, they had to relent until the DNA results confirmed their story. As they departed, the elderly woman cast a venomous look at the child and muttered something about unfinished business from the past, puzzling everyone. Soon after they left, the investigating officer tried to reassure the girl, telling her things would be okay. But the girl, still haunted, insisted the baby would be in danger if handed back. The few words she managed to say next caused yet more concern. She maintained that these people did not want the child out of love, but for some sinister reason, and if returned to them, the newborn's life would be in imminent peril. Intrigued, the social worker and a pediatrician pressed for details, but the girl fell silent. Perhaps she feared being overheard, or that adults wouldn't believe her. Still, doctors performed new medical exams, revealing even more unsettling clues. Besides bruises, the baby seemed to have been exposed to some toxic substances during pregnancy, possibly improper medication or something that endangered fetal development. These discoveries prompted further investigation. Why, if this child was allegedly part of a wealthy family, was his condition so dire? Why did the girl claim she had rescued him from a life-threatening situation? Evidence of negligence was mounting, perhaps even abuse. In the midst of these concerns, the police tried to track down the girl's background. They phoned the local school, hoping to speak with someone who knew her better. They learned she had briefly mentioned having to run away to save someone, but nothing concrete enough to identify any relatives or caretakers. Late that afternoon, a detective arrived with a lead. The address the girl mentioned was in a rundown suburb, but initial checks showed no sign of her parents or guardians. Any personal data she had provided only led to dead ends. This deepened the mystery. Was she hiding information, or had she never had a stable home? The wealthy couple, for their part, kept up the pressure through their lawyer. He repeatedly called the hospital, threatening legal action if they did not return the infant soon. Staff responded that until they verified the child's health and the couple's claim, he would not be discharged. Yet the underlying fear remained that these influential individuals might find a way to force the hospital's hand. By nightfall, everything was at an uneasy standstill. The girl clung to the newborn, refusing to eat or sleep unless the baby remained by her side. Occasionally, the infant's cries echoed in the ward, drawing sympathy from nurses and doctors. They observed the girl's unwavering determination. Though just a child, she seemed more resolute than many adults in her mission to keep the baby safe. As the hospital lights dimmed and visitors were asked to leave, the staff prepared for a tense night. A policeman stood guard near the room, fully aware the situation could escalate. The social worker tried to calm the girl before bedtime, offering a blanket and a gentle assurance that no one could take the newborn. She merely shook her head, holding the baby tighter. In that moment, the real question was whether they were looking at a desperate child with an overactive imagination, or someone who had witnessed something truly terrible. If the latter, then what dark secrets connected this baby to an evidently powerful couple? And could a simple DNA test possibly unravel the layers of deceit, or would it plunge them all deeper into conflict? In the silence of that uneasy night, these questions swirled in every adult's mind, each one hoping they could find answers before anyone got hurt. The baby, oblivious to the turmoil, slept fitfully in the girl's arms, an innocent piece of a puzzle that soon threatened to tear their world apart. The night dragged on at the hospital, with no respite for those caught in the middle of this unfolding drama. The girl refused to leave the newborn's crib, briefly nodding off only to jolt awake each time the baby stirred. Nurses walked in and out, checking on the infant's vitals, adjusting IV drips, and reminding the child she needed to rest. She simply shook her head and tightened her hold on the little one. It was early morning when an investigator returned to the hospital, looking haggard from the night's work. He pulled the pediatrician and the social worker aside to brief them on his progress. Despite hours of phone calls and checking records, he had found almost nothing about the baby's origins. No nearby hospitals or clinics had any recent birth, matching the infant's description, which suggested the mother might have delivered outside a standard medical facility. The absence of documentation only deepened the mystery. On the other hand, the background check on the elderly couple yielded more intriguing results. According to the investigator, they weren't just wealthy. They ran a philanthropic foundation that claimed to help underprivileged children. Newspaper clippings showed them donating money to various causes and hosting charity galas. Curiously, there was no mention of a son or daughter in those articles. They seemed to be recognized solely for their charitable contributions rather than having any known heirs. Eavesdropping from a distance, the girl paid close attention. Her dark eyes flicked toward the officers whenever new details emerged. She displayed a mixture of wariness and frustration, as though these revelations about the couple's benevolent persona were of no consequence to her. She remained convinced it was all a facade. Eventually, the couple's lawyer arrived once more, visibly annoyed. He carried 2 thick folders of paperwork, claiming they proved his client's legal right to the baby. He spoke of official certifications and signed documents that would confirm the couple's familial ties, even though the DNA test results weren't yet available. The social worker, who was well versed in legal matters, insisted on seeing these papers thoroughly examined first. Calmly, she explained that the hospital had a duty to protect a vulnerable child. The baby's health was paramount. The lawyer's face darkened, but he had no choice but to comply, at least for the moment. Meanwhile, the girl remained in the makeshift pediatric ward. A nurse approached with fruit and milk, coaxing her to eat. She was so consumed by worry that she barely touched the food. As the nurse gently pressed her to share more about how she came to the hospital, the girl only repeated that the baby was in danger. Then, in a trembling voice, she added that the couple wanted the infant for reasons that had nothing to do with love or familial bonds. Before the nurse could probe for more details, the girl clammed up, casting wary looks at the doorway as if she expected eavesdroppers. This passing comment fueled further suspicion among the staff. Why indeed would this powerful couple claim a baby with bruises and obvious signs of neglect? Even if the baby were truly their grandchild, How could they justify the lack of prenatal care? The pediatrician reminded everyone that the newborn was malnourished, showing signs of toxins in its bloodstream that might have been introduced during pregnancy. None of it aligned with the image of a wealthy family welcoming a new addition. The rest of that day was fraught with tension. Various individuals attempted to talk with the girl, but she refused to say more. She seemed spooked, as though speaking openly could trigger dire consequences. By late afternoon, hospital security noticed an unusual number of people lurking in waiting areas. Some said they were relatives of patients, but their behavior seemed odd. Too much pacing around the pediatric wing, asking pointed questions about a baby. When confronted, they offered weak excuses before leaving. Detectives took note of these suspicious individuals. It was possible the couple had hired private investigators or intermediaries to keep tabs on the baby. Concerned, the hospital's administration decided to increase security measures around the pediatric area. That included limiting visitors and monitoring the entrances more carefully. Evening came, bringing with it more apprehension. News spread among the staff that the DNA test results might be ready by the next morning. If those results matched the elderly man's sample, the couple could demand immediate custody. Yet the baby's deteriorating condition contradicted the notion of a caring family, and the staff felt uneasy about releasing him. Meanwhile, the girl's persistent warning that the child's life was in danger echoed in their minds. As the hospital settled into a night routine, the girl tried to fight off sleep, sitting upright in a chair beside the crib. Occasionally, a wave of exhaustion overwhelmed her, and she dozed off, only to jerk awake a few minutes later. One sympathetic nurse offered to stand guard so the child could rest, but the girl refused. She didn't trust anyone else to keep the newborn safe. Out in the corridors, police officers quietly exchanged information, uncertain whether there was an imminent threat or if this was simply a custody dispute. One officer spoke briefly with the pediatrician and social worker, mentioning that the couple appeared to have significant clout. They had already made calls to local officials, presumably trying to influence the outcome. Another officer mentioned that some local reporters were sniffing around the story, but so far, the hospital had kept them at bay. Around midnight, a staff member noticed the girl's head bobbing, eyes fluttering as she struggled to stay awake. Moved by compassion, the nurse gently draped a blanket over her shoulders. Standing just inside the doorway was a police officer on guard, determined not to let any unauthorized person enter. The neon glow from the hallway lights illuminated the baby's sleeping form in the crib, highlighting a sense of fragile peace in a room burdened by secrecy and fear. Despite this temporary calm, everyone realized that the next day might bring escalation. If the DNA results confirmed any relationship, the couple would likely press harder. If the results were negative, it would raise more questions. Why then had they insisted the baby was theirs? What was their ulterior motive? And where did this leave the girl, whose only stated goal was to protect an infant that might not even be biologically connected to her? In another part of the hospital, a worried administrator reflected on how bizarre the situation had become. A terrified child, a newborn with signs of abuse, a supposedly philanthropic elderly couple with legal muscle. They all collided in this setting, and the truth lay buried beneath layers of conflicting accounts. Somewhere amid the confusion, a life and death secret churned. As night wore on, a somber feeling spread. Perhaps they were all just scratching the surface of a deeper web of intrigue. The clues didn't add up neatly. Every new piece of information only revealed fresh inconsistencies, making it clear that whatever was truly happening was tangled in greed, fear, or both. The girl, so resolute in her vow to save the baby, became the only constant in this puzzle. Her conviction rooted in a reality far scarier than adults could fathom. And still, that repeated question haunted them all. What had driven a 10-year-old to put herself at such risk, carrying a newborn through the streets to a hospital, fearful of an influential couple's reach? If the child was right, and the baby's life was in genuine danger, Time was running out to uncover the truth. Tomorrow's DNA results could be pivotal, or they might merely add another twist to a steadily unraveling case. Night fell once again over the hospital, and the relentless pace of developments offered little respite. The pediatrician in charge of the neonatal ward noticed the girl growing more agitated with each passing hour. She turned her head at every distant sound of footsteps in the hallway, gazing at the baby with mounting concern, as if each moment might be critical for his survival. The exhaustion was plain in her eyes, yet she refused to let herself rest. Elsewhere in the hospital, the director was conferring with the police and social worker, going over the latest details of the case. The DNA test was still pending, but was rumored to be almost ready, and everyone anticipated it might arrive the following morning. In situations like this, time was the enemy. The wealthy elderly couple seemed hell-bent on using their influence to fast-track legal measures in their favor, while the staff felt increasing pressure to shield the baby from potential harm. Not long after, a police officer on duty volunteered to patrol the corridors more regularly, making sure no one suspicious slipped inside. He was immediately wary of encountering one of the couple's lawyers prowling around at odd hours. In fact, that very night, one of their attorneys was spotted roaming different floors without a clear reason. When questioned, the lawyer claimed only to be checking on the newborn's health. Yet the insistence on walking through the hospital at a late hour seemed at best dubious. Around 10 in the evening, a sympathetic nurse once again tried to coax the girl to lie down. She placed a cushion by the baby's crib, assuring the child that hospital staff would remain vigilant. The girl, though clearly drained, still shook her head, her arms protectively folded over the rails of the makeshift bed. In a moment of vulnerability, she dozed off, with her forehead resting on the edge of the crib, only to wake minutes later in a panic, fearing someone had taken the baby while she slept. A uniformed police officer in the hallway caught wind of her distress and gently assured her he was keeping watch. He offered a few words of comfort, pointing out that nobody could just stroll into the infant's room unchallenged. But the girl stayed on edge. Beneath her brave exterior, it was clear she carried an overwhelming terror that at any instant all her efforts might be undone. Shortly after midnight, an odd occurrence took place in the hospital's parking lot. One of the night shift nurses happened to glance out the window and saw the silhouette of a man in a suit speaking on a cell phone, pacing near a luxury car. Just as she tried to get a better look, the man climbed into the car and drove away. Concerned, she alerted security. By the time they checked the cameras, there was no trace of the mysterious visitor. They guessed it might be yet another figure linked to the couple, but had no concrete proof. Meanwhile, the girl continued her lonely vigil by the baby's side. Now and then, she flashed back to the perilous days she'd spent wandering the streets with the newborn, staying in alleyways and run-down corners to avoid being seen. She remembered the gnawing fear of being pursued or discovered, which had fueled her desperation. Even now, within the supposedly safe confines of the hospital, she couldn't shake the sense that powerful people were lurking beyond the doors, waiting to pounce. On that same floor, the pediatric team checked the infant's vital signs. His condition was gradually improving. He had gained a bit of weight, showed less bruising, and had more stable vital measurements. Still, the doctors found traces of harmful substances in his blood, a grim sign that someone might have administered questionable medications or worse during the pregnancy. Nobody could fathom how a baby from a wealthy background would end up in such dire straits. These unresolved questions and rising concerns led a staff physician to inspect all entries and exits of the building, verifying IDs so no unauthorized individual could hover near the pediatric ward. Most visitors turned out to be legitimate, but the overall vigilance had undeniably been stepped up. There was a sense that something was afoot, some attempt to snatch the newborn or coerce the girl into handing him over. Inside the child's room, the ambiance was a mix of tenderness and tension. The girl refused to leave the newborn even for a short while. Periodically, nurses came to measure his temperature or adjust his IV line, which she permitted, but she watched them closely, ready to intervene if anything seemed off. By around 1 in the morning, the police officer on rounds noticed faint footprints of water near a side entrance to the hospital. When he went to investigate, the area was empty, and the footprints faded into a section of tile floor. Nobody had registered entry or exit at that particular door. Alarmed, the officer reported the incident, adding to the growing list of suspicious activity surrounding the case. Whether these were just curious onlookers or hired go-betweens for the couple, no one knew, but it stoked the mounting worry that the hospital was under surveillance. As thunder boomed outside, heavy rain began pounding the windows, intensifying the foreboding atmosphere. Lightning illuminated the corridors in flashes, and every rumble made the girl jump. A pediatrician, on her own initiative, set up a small cot in a nearby room so she could be within earshot if anything went awry. She was not about to leave the situation unattended. Amid the hushed chaos, the girl, surrounded by machines softly beeping, clutched the newborn's hand. One of the nurses saw the fatigue etched on her face, the depth of her trembling resolve. She gently told the child that nobody here wanted to harm the baby. They only wanted to help. With a wavering voice, the girl recounted bits of the nightmare she'd lived, how someone, unnamed, had warned her of a looming threat over the baby, something sinister orchestrated by people with money. She offered only scraps of information, as if holding back the most damning details out of fear. Again, she fell silent soon after, as if realizing how dangerous it could be to divulge too much. The rest of the night progressed slowly. Nurses came by to check on both the baby and the girl, offering occasional reassurance. A few times they saw her nod off for seconds at a time, only to jerk awake, heart pounding. For her, letting down her guard even momentarily felt like an unacceptable gamble. In the broader sphere of the hospital, the staff did their rounds with uncharacteristic wariness, anticipating that the wealthy couple might attempt a covert move before the DNA results arrived. But by dawn, the security detail reported no further incidents, though the unsettling feeling remained. As the city's first rays of sunlight broke through the rain clouds, everyone prepared for the new day. The DNA test might finally arrive, and along with it, a turning point in this tangled affair. In that moment, the burning questions persisted. Why would an influential couple fight so hard for a neglected infant? And why was a 10-year-old risking everything to keep him safe? In the glow of those early hours, the next day's revelations loomed large, hinting that the hospital's uneasy calm might soon erupt into crisis, or deliver the clarity they all desperately needed. Morning broke, with an uneasy air lingering over the hospital. Whispers flew among the staff that the DNA test results were finally in. Everyone gathered near the administrative office, awaiting a formal announcement from the director. The 10-year-old girl, looking exhausted, sensed the tension and clung more tightly to the baby's crib. Though she didn't fully grasp the purpose of the test, she realized it held tremendous importance. Word also spread that the wealthy elderly couple was on their way, likely armed with more legal maneuvers. When the results were opened at last, shock rippled through the small group of officials. There was no genetic match between the newborn and the older man who claimed to be the baby's grandfather. 0% likelihood of a biological relationship. Police and hospital administrators exchanged stunned looks. This meant the couple had been lying all along, or, at the very least, had no direct blood ties to the child. The official document also ruled out any relation to the elderly woman, eliminating the possibility of her being the baby's grandmother or any close kin. This raised the stakes of the situation considerably, since it pointed to outright deception. Within minutes, the couple's attorney arrived, flustered and visibly at a loss for words. He recovered quickly, attempting to downplay the DNA findings. He claimed other documents, or perhaps an in vitro procedure, might explain the mismatch. He still insisted that the couple had a legitimate right to the baby. However, his arguments sounded increasingly desperate, revealing how little ground he had to stand on. As word of the DNA results trickled through the corridors, the girl seemed both relieved and uncertain. She didn't fully understand the science, but she recognized that if the test said they weren't the baby's family, maybe the hospital staff wouldn't give him up. Still, her dark, wary eyes betrayed a lingering fear. She sensed the couple might try another approach: money, fake adoption papers, or underhanded tactics to get what they wanted. And sure enough, the older man and woman arrived soon afterward, incensed. Their fury was palpable as they confronted the police officers, questioning the validity of the lab results, accusing the hospital of fraud, and even insinuating collusion with the girl to defame them. The authorities listened but stood firm, highlighting that there was now proof the baby was in no way biologically theirs. Any custody claim would have to be re-examined. The hospital's first obligation remained the infant's welfare. It was then that the little girl, trembling, repeated her plea that the couple had no right to the child. The elderly man shot her a look of utter contempt, labeling her an insignificant street kid. Tensions flared dangerously, prompting a police officer to gently but firmly escort the couple into a side room to keep them away from the pediatric ward. Their lawyer, fighting to keep control, tried to argue that there were alternative methods to establish parentage and that a formal adoption was underway. The social worker calmly asked to see the adoption papers. The ones he produced seemed suspicious, missing official seals and required signatures. The police collected them as potential evidence of fraud. After this confrontation, the couple stormed out, vowing to seek higher authorities and threatening legal action against the hospital, the police, and anyone else who stood in there. Away, the older woman tossed a vicious remark about unfinished past business, which only deepened the unease of everyone present. No one knew what she meant, but it sounded ominous. In the wake of their departure, the hospital staff breathed a tentative sigh of relief. At least for now, the baby would stay under medical observation, given his fragile health. He was on IV fluids and remained susceptible to infections, and by law, the hospital couldn't release him until proper paperwork and a verified family background were established. In the meantime, the police gained a stronger mandate to investigate the couple's motives. Later that day, the pediatrician decided to intervene more decisively. She recommended putting a formal note in the infant's file stating his condition required ongoing hospitalization. This would keep him from being discharged abruptly if the couple attempted another legal maneuver. At the same time, she suggested that the girl, lacking any known guardian, might need a temporary protective arrangement, but the child refused to be separated from the newborn, so the staff had to find a more nuanced solution. Realizing the complexity of the case, authorities began digging deeper into the couple's background. One officer found an anonymous tip about some shady dealings. It hinted at bribes paid to cover up unscrupulous adoptions and hush money to silence witnesses. If true, it suggested that the wealthy couple might be part of a broader network of illegal practices. Throughout the day, the 10-year-old girl stuck close to the baby. Despite repeated urgings from doctors to sleep or eat, she barely left his side. Every now and then, she permitted a nurse to hold him during a feeding or changing, but she never took her eyes off him. It was as though she believed only her constant vigilance stood between the infant and whatever sinister force the couple might unleash. By evening, the situation became more complicated when rumors circulated that the couple planned to file for an emergency custody order in another jurisdiction. Their lawyer could possibly exploit legal loopholes, ensuring the baby was transferred to their care. Alarmed by this possibility, the police ramped up their investigation, trying to gather any hard evidence of abuse or criminal activity that could block such a move. Then, in the late afternoon, a phone call came through to the hospital director's office, a blocked number. The voice on the line was distorted, warning that the whole matter was much bigger than a single bogus adoption. It claimed the baby was part of a tangle of hidden deals, and powerful individuals wanted to secure control of the child. Whoever was calling ended by declaring the girl's life was in danger. Before the director could trace the call, the line went dead. The director, stunned, immediately informed the police. This matched the child's warnings that the baby was unsafe with the couple. The hospital staff realized they were dealing with something possibly akin to a criminal ring. The social worker, realizing the girl might well be caught in the crosshairs, urged officials to step up protection measures. By nightfall, the baby showed signs of mild improvement, which brought some relief to the pediatric team. He remained fragile but was recovering from malnutrition. As for the girl, her resilience amazed everyone. One nurse tried to coax her to share more details, gently asking how she had obtained the baby in the first place. All the child would reveal was that the mother and the infant were in serious danger, so she had no choice but to flee. The cryptic nature of her statement, combined with her obvious terror, only fueled everyone's determination to keep them safe. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon as tension simmered within the hospital walls. Everyone knew the next wave of pressure from the couple was coming. A detective began calling other hospitals, private clinics, and even traveling to the girl's last known address. He found nothing but abandoned buildings and scant traces of anyone who might be her relative. She seemed completely alone, except for the baby. As the day ended, worry lurked in every corner. The staff understood that if the couple succeeded in securing a questionable court order, especially under the guise of protecting the baby, they might return under the cover of legal authority. How could they be stopped without definitive proof of wrongdoing? Meanwhile, the child, despite her unwavering stance, remained just that, a child in need of safety herself. Late that evening, the hospital finally quieted. The corridor lights dimmed, and the steady hum of machines lulled some staff into a drowsy routine. In the baby's room, however, the tension was thick. The little girl watched over him like a sentinel, determined to fulfill the promise she had made to herself, that no matter what happened, she would not let him fall into the hands of those she was convinced wished him harm. Another night descended on the hospital, and the tension in the corridors only grew. After receiving the anonymous message hinting at major crimes and secrets involving the wealthy couple, the local police contacted a Chicago precinct to investigate a possible witness who once worked at a suspicious fertility clinic. However, the information was fragmented. No full name or exact address was provided, so the detective in that city had to sift through files, making calls in hopes of finding someone who could confirm illegal adoptions or other wrongdoing. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the girl never left the baby's side. She spent the day under heavy protection, with officers patrolling close by. Still, she remained visibly wary. She even asked at one point if the couple could bribe the very officers guarding them. One policeman assured her they had integrity, but he couldn't deny that external pressures might arise. Upon hearing this, she simply lowered her gaze, as if she already understood corruption could lurk in unexpected places. In the hospital's administrative wing, the director, the social worker, and the pediatrician debated next steps. If the investigation confirmed that the girl was in real danger, they would need to escalate protective measures for both her and the baby. Yet the wealthy couple possessed extensive connections, including some donations made months prior to different hospital wings. That influence could complicate procedures. The director even considered transferring the two to another facility, but feared reprisals that might endanger other patients. The decision wasn't straightforward. Late that afternoon, an empathetic investigator approached the girl. She spoke softly, asking if the child wanted to talk about what was weighing on her mind. At first, the girl hesitated, but slowly, she revealed a few extra fragments of her story. She explained she'd been living in an abandoned house with a woman who wasn't her biological mother but had taken her in. One night, this woman had welcomed a distraught individual, a mother carrying a newborn with bruises. The woman and the girl saw how badly the baby was hurt, and the mother was terrified that powerful people might seize the infant. Seeing the imminent danger, the girl took it upon herself to protect the baby, realizing he needed immediate medical attention. According to the girl, the mother disappeared afterward, leaving the baby in their care. Fearing retaliation, the girl and the caretaker fled, eventually leading the child to walk into this hospital alone. This confession aligned with suspicions of an illicit adoption scheme, yet parts of the narrative remained murky, such as why the mother never sought the police or some official help. Possibly she was too frightened or under blackmail. Nonetheless, the story explained the girl's profound emotional connection with the baby and the risks she was willing to take. After the conversation, the detective and social worker spoke privately. They believed that until they found the woman who had given birth or the caretaker who had sheltered them, the case would remain incomplete. Further evidence was essential to prove the couple's criminal involvement, lest they attempt to legally demand the baby again. Even so, they already had clues pointing to neglect and forged adoption papers. As the hospital staff busied themselves with these revelations, the girl gradually allowed herself a short nap, dozing off for the first time in days. A nurse slipped a blanket over her and stood guard, concerned that the couple might try something overnight. The policeman who had been on night watch before once again took up position in the corridor, making his rounds to ensure nothing suspicious occurred. Around midnight, thunder rumbled outside as rain hammered the hospital windows. Lightning illuminated the hallways, adding to the tense atmosphere. Every few flashes, the girl stirred awake, checking the baby's crib. The policeman at the door signaled to her that everything was fine. She tried to calm herself, but her heart still pounded at the thought of someone lurking in the shadows. Just after 1 a.m., a night shift nurse noticed a strange noise in a lower floor corridor. It sounded like someone fidgeting with a window or forcing a lock. When the policeman on patrol arrived, he found no one, but saw damp footprints on the tile floor that led nowhere. It was as if someone had just slipped out. This discovery heightened everyone's unease. Could it be an intruder sent by the couple? There was no proof, only strong suspicions. The night carried on, with the medical team near the baby's station paying extra attention to every detail. The child's condition, though still fragile, had slightly improved. His vital signs looked more stable, and for the first time there was cautious optimism. This alone seemed to comfort the exhausted girl. A few times she even smiled faintly as nurses told her the baby was growing stronger, as though her perseverance had finally paid off. Sunrise finally arrived, but the sense of urgency remained. Some rumored the couple had powerful friends capable of orchestrating a snatch and grab, if they so wished. Meanwhile, the detective from Chicago reached out, apologizing that leads were scarce, but vowing to keep searching records and speaking to former employees of that dubious fertility clinic. Morning eventually gave way to a frenetic day. The baby underwent further examinations, responding well to treatment. He no longer needed supplemental oxygen and started reacting more vibrantly to stimuli. This brought the girl a measure of relief, a sign her ordeal hadn't been in vain. However, there was no forgetting the danger. A policeman informed hospital administrators that rumors were swirling about the couple's interest in leaving the country, possibly as soon as they sensed the case turning against them. Hence, they requested authorities at the local airport keep watch for them. No official arrest warrants had been issued yet, but the officials wanted to be prepared. By the time the sun was setting again, staff members could practically feel an impending confrontation. The pediatrician who had taken a personal stake in the child's welfare left notes for the night shift crew, instructing them to follow strict security protocols. The girl, for her part, asked repeatedly if the baby was truly safe. The police assured her they were in control, though they privately understood her mistrust, given everything she'd been through. As evening deepened, the little one started fussing, and the girl gently rocked him until he calmed. A nurse observed them from the doorway, struck by how caring she was, despite her own young age and trauma. Yet the fact that she'd faced so many hardships underscored the magnitude of the situation. The hospital could protect them for now. But what about long term? No one yet had a clear plan for the future. The couple hadn't shown their faces that day, which worried many. Perhaps they were regrouping or seeking out more influential allies. The policeman on duty suspected they might be planning a late-night move once the staff had let down their guard. His solution was to remain extra vigilant, double-checking doors, questioning strangers, and pacing more often near the pediatric area. And still, the question gnawed at everyone. Were they on the brink of a real breakthrough in the investigation, or was the couple about to make a decisive strike first? The entire hospital braced for what might happen if the night brought yet another unexplained visitor creeping around outside, or if the next phone call revealed an even darker layer of secrets. The baby's mere presence had triggered a chain reaction of fear, lies, and potential criminal activity, yet the little infant slumbered on, unaware of the turmoil swirling all around. In the girl's eyes, though, a faint hope shone. In her quiet moments, she recalled that very first night holding the newborn, vowing she would keep him from harm. Now, after days of constant struggle, she sensed a growing alliance of adults, nurses, doctors, police, trying to help. If she could just hold on a bit longer, maybe the truth would finally burst into the open, granting both her and the baby a safe path forward. By the next day, the local precinct overseeing the case was abuzz with new leads, and the hospital sensed something big was about to happen. A detective returned early that morning to speak with the director and social worker, hinting that a breakthrough might be at hand. He mentioned that the police in Chicago had finally tracked down a former employee of the suspicious fertility clinic. Though this person hadn't yet told the whole story, she might hold records implicating influential figures, possibly the very couple who claimed the hospital baby was theirs. No one knew for certain how this might unfold, but the staff prepared for whatever might come next. Yet the 10-year-old girl was left in the dark. All she perceived was that the atmosphere grew more and more tense, and that, although the hospital still felt like the safest place for the baby at present, everything seemed precarious. Deep down, she believed that at any moment their lives could be upended by another unexpected move. Perhaps it was her well-honed street smarts, or maybe just the memory of what she'd had to do to protect the newborn in the first place. But she couldn't shake the sense that a looming threat hovered just outside the hospital walls. That morning, the pediatrician decided to take the girl to a small interior courtyard in the hospital, a place with a bench and a few potted plants, so she could get a bit of fresh air. Some of the nurses insisted that the baby would be safe in the neonatal unit for a few minutes, especially with a police officer standing by. The girl resisted at first, unwilling to separate from him, but eventually relented when they promised to bring her right back if anything seemed wrong. Stepping outside, she inhaled the crisp autumn air, her eyes darting anxiously to every door and window. Meanwhile, word arrived that the detective had made further progress. He informed the hospital director that in Chicago, the former clinic, employee claimed to have witnessed multiple cases of newborns being handed off through illegal or highly dubious adoptions. Wealthy families wanting heirs without the hassle of official channels had apparently paid large sums to fast-track custody. In some instances, mothers had been deceived or coerced into giving up their babies, signing documents they barely understood. If these stories proved true, it suggested a more extensive and sinister network than anyone had initially imagined. And the elderly couple seemed deeply tied to it. Upon hearing this from the detective, the social worker and hospital director exchanged looks of concern. They realized that if these allegations were accurate, the hospital's newborn might be just one piece of a far-reaching puzzle, and powerful individuals might have a lot at stake in keeping the matter hush-hush. Ironically, that meant the girl's warning that dangerous people were circling the baby held a very real possibility of being true. With that in mind, the police decided to intensify their efforts. They alerted nearby jurisdictions, hoping to find any mothers or witnesses who could give official statements about forced adoptions or extortion. The girl, still in the courtyard, glanced up at the pediatrician who sat beside her. She looked anxious, unable to rest. The doctor tried to reassure her, gently explaining that the hospital, alongside the police, was doing everything possible to protect both her and the infant. The girl offered a small nod, but couldn't fully hide her lingering mistrust. Her eyes would flick toward every corner, as though half expecting to see the elderly couple charging in with lawyers or hired muscle. The pediatrician recognized that no words could instantly heal the trauma of a child who had lived in constant fear. The hours ticked by, and activity in the hospital's corridors remained hectic. Nurses rushed to and fro, dealing with their usual patient load, while also keeping an eye on strangers or suspicious figures. Midday arrived with a flurry of new developments. The detective got word that the Chicago contact, the ex-fertility clinic employee, was prepared to talk over a video call and share any documents she possessed. Immediately, the director, the social worker, and 2 officers set up in a private conference room. The ex-employee's account was startling. She confirmed that, years ago, a certain elderly man had bankrolled some of the clinic's questionable practices, paying large sums. Under the table, she remembered seeing documents that hinted at multiple adoption cases facilitated through intimidation or deceit. Her memory was hazy on specific names, but there was no doubt the wealthy couple from the hospital was connected to these dealings. She also mentioned that rumors circulated about a relative of the man, possibly an illegitimate son, whose child might one day inherit a significant portion of the family's estate, if discovered. The employee believed that if such a grandchild existed, the older man might attempt to seize control of the baby before any public scandal could erupt. In the conference room, the detective and social worker traded astonished looks. This story perfectly fit the narrative building around the hospital baby, though the DNA tests suggested no direct match, perhaps because the older man had withheld or tampered with his sample, or perhaps because the baby's real father was deceased or otherwise untraceable. One thing was clear: the couple wanted custody, presumably to keep the family secret or to manipulate any potential inheritance. And that might explain the baby's precarious health. If he'd been born into the hush-hush environment of an illicit clinic, there was no telling what extreme measures might have been involved in the pregnancy or why the girl ended up having to protect him. Eventually, the call ended, and the detective's mind was churning with renewed urgency. He updated the local authorities and prepared to draft a formal request for the woman's testimony, which could lead to warrants for the couple's arrest if corroborated. However, that alone wouldn't be sufficient unless they linked the baby unequivocally to the hidden side of the couple's family. They needed a confession, further evidence, or any official records naming him as an heir. Outside in the hallway, the tension was palpable. The little girl grew increasingly restless as the day wore on. She noticed the staff buzzing, discussing new revelations, but none of them had time to sit down and tell her everything. From her vantage point, she saw suits and uniforms passing by, hushed conversations taking place near the hospital's administrative offices, and a sense that something major was brewing. Noticing her anxiety, a compassionate nurse tried to explain that they might soon have proof to protect the baby, though the nurse couldn't reveal every detail. By late afternoon, a fresh wave of rumors came in. The couple was possibly planning an overseas trip, presumably to hide from the fallout if charges were filed. If they sensed that the net was tightening, they might flee to avoid scandal or criminal liability. Fearing the worst, the police stationed more officers around the city's airport and checked in with private airfields. If the pair attempted to board a flight, someone would intercept them. Within the hospital, employees were told to be extra vigilant. At this point, everyone knew the stakes were high. If the older man and woman showed up with forged documents or tried to remove the baby by force, the staff needed to stand their ground. The social worker, meanwhile, suggested a fallback plan. If the danger became dire, the girl and the baby might be relocated to another facility under assumed names, at least until the investigation yielded concrete charges against the couple. As dusk fell, the girl noticed the neon lights flickering on in the corridors. The day had passed in a blur of tension and cryptic updates. Though physically safe inside the hospital, she felt an emotional fatigue that had been mounting for weeks. She worried about how much longer she could keep the baby in her arms without him being forcibly taken. She worried about the mother who'd entrusted him to her. She worried about the caretaker who'd vanished shortly after. And she worried that these adults in suits, however well-meaning, might be overwhelmed by the powerful opponents who wanted the child. What she did not know was that, in a small office upstairs, evidence was coalescing. Testimonies and digital documents from Chicago were being collated. Local authorities drafted requests for urgent judicial orders. A swirl of paperwork and phone calls hinted at a brewing legal storm aimed directly at the wealthy couple and their accomplices. If everything aligned, the next 24 hours could change everything, yet no one could be certain how the confrontation would unfold, or whether the couple would make a bold move before the authorities were ready. The hospital braced itself, aware that at any moment the entire case could erupt into a final showdown. The baby, hooked up to monitors and IV drips, gently dozed in the pediatric ward, unaware of the storm circling around him. And beside him, the 10-year-old girl silently reaffirmed her vow. She would do anything to shield him from the darkness clawing at their door. Another tense night settled over the hospital, the sense of foreboding thick in every corridor. Rumors circulated that law enforcement in Chicago had finally received hard evidence against the elderly couple, documents and testimony linking them to an underground network of illegal adoptions. Meanwhile, local investigators discovered troubling indicators that, while the couple claimed the newborn as family, their real motivations had little to do with genuine parental ties. The specifics remained vague, but the puzzle pieces appeared to be coming together in a sinister way. Early that morning, the hospital director, along with the social worker and a detective, pored over what was said to be a set of confidential files from Chicago. They gleaned that years ago, this couple had funneled substantial funds into a fertility clinic that was later shuttered for irregularities. Multiple babies, allegedly born through special arrangements, had then been pushed into shady or outright illegal adoptions. The detective hypothesized that the newborn under the hospital's care might fit into this dark history. At the very least, the couple's overwhelming eagerness to claim the child, despite clear evidence of non-relation, raised countless red flags. The 10-year-old girl, however, understood only that activity throughout the hospital had grown more urgent. She noticed staff rushing about, and an officer who'd been assigned to her case said in passing that something big might happen soon. She clutched the newborn, as always, refusing to let him out of her sight unless medical staff absolutely needed to handle him. Occasionally, they coaxed her to take short walks for fresh air or to eat, but she always insisted on returning quickly. By mid-morning, the detective contacted the hospital director with new developments. He announced that the Chicago Witness, a former clinic employee, had uncovered even more evidence, including questionable financial transactions and what seemed to be blackmail payments to mothers coerced into giving up their newborns. This suggested the elderly couple had for years orchestrated or at least benefited from a system designed to procure babies for wealthy clients who wanted heirs or who wished to avoid the official adoption process. Within these documents, mention was made of a younger man, thought to be an unrecognized son of the elderly man. Records suggested he'd passed away recently, leaving behind an unborn child. That child, if confirmed to be the newborn in the hospital, stood to inherit a sizable portion of the family fortune, unless the couple managed to seize guardianship or otherwise control the child's fate. For the investigators, this explained the bizarre contradictions. Why would a wealthy pair cling so desperately to an infant who clearly wasn't biologically theirs, at least according to standard DNA reports? Possibly, the older man had surreptitiously used altered samples or avoided giving real genetic material. One thing was certain: it was no innocent scenario. That same morning, a hospital staff member inadvertently overheard part of the conversation. In the corridor outside the administrative offices, returning to her station, she couldn't help but whisper to a co-worker that the baby might be a hidden heir. The gossip spread like wildfire behind the scenes, sparking both shock and outrage that anyone would treat a child like a commodity. Thankfully, the staff kept things discreet around the girl, not wishing to frighten her further with half-understood rumors. However, the tension became near palpable, an undercurrent of anticipation and dread. Shortly before noon, the couple's lawyer reappeared, more agitated than ever. He marched through reception, demanding to see hospital administrators, brandishing a stack of documents in an attempt to force custody. But this time, he was met by the hospital director and a police officer who calmly stated they had no obligation to release the child until the authorities finalized their investigation. The lawyer threatened lawsuits, claimed the hospital was violating legitimate parental rights, and demanded immediate compliance. His efforts were fruitless. In fact, seeing the unwavering stance of law enforcement, he stormed away in a rage, vowing to escalate the matter. Simultaneously, in the pediatric ward, the girl sensed something was wrong. From her seat next to the incubator, now more of a regular crib than an incubator, given the baby's slow but steady improvement, she heard raised voices echoing down the hallway. She braced for another confrontation, gripping the newborn's tiny hand. When the voices died away, a nurse tiptoed in and whispered that everything was under control. The girl nodded, though her eyes remained troubled. Afternoon arrived, bringing another surprise. An anonymous phone call reached the nurse's station, with the caller claiming to possess life or death information about the couple's plot to take the baby. The nurse, alarmed, tried to keep the caller on the line, but they hung up after muttering cryptic warnings. Though the staff lacked proof of who the caller was, the pattern of mysterious tips and unmarked calls only heightened concerns that the hospital was being closely watched. Behind the scenes, the detective pushed to finalize a request for arrest warrants. All that was needed now were the official testimonies from Chicago to be certified. If everything panned out, local authorities could arrest the couple and any accomplices on charges of fraudulent adoption, possibly kidnapping, and other serious infractions. Aware of this looming crackdown, the social worker quietly approached the hospital director, suggesting they prepare a safe exit strategy for the girl and the newborn, in case the couple attempted a last-ditch snatch before the authorities could intervene. That evening, the staff buzzed with barely contained nerves. The girl, picking up on the tension, asked a police officer if she and the baby were really safe. He tried reassuring her, saying that once they had the official go-ahead, the couple would be barred from coming near them. The child simply nodded, unconvinced. She knew from experience that powerful people often found ways around the rules. Nightfall brought no relief. The clouds outside hovered low, threatening to unleash another downpour, while inside the hospital's fluorescent lights gave the corridors an eerie glow. Nurses limited visitors in the pediatric wing, and a pair of officers stood guard by the main stairwell. Rumor said the couple had departed their mansion, but no one knew their whereabouts. The tension verged on a breaking point. Meanwhile, the baby, blissfully unaware of the maelstrom, rested in the crib, his condition steadily improving. The girl eyed him almost protectively, yet her expression showed hints of a deeper conflict. Now that she saw the child recovering, She grappled with the realization that once this crisis ended, her own path remained uncertain. She had no living parents, no stable home. She had saved the baby's life, but who would save hers? In a moment of rare vulnerability, she confided in a nurse, voice quivering. She'd had no one else for a long time. Her parents were gone, and the woman who'd sheltered her had disappeared. The nurse gently reminded her that social services would help, that she could find a caring environment, maybe even stay connected with the baby. But the girl only shrugged, lost in thoughts. The entire ordeal had taught her to be skeptical of adult promises. Outside, the night deepened and staff began taking extra precautions, double-checking security cameras, ensuring all entrances were locked, verifying that essential personnel were on the watch. The hush that settled in the halls was heavy with expectation. Everyone knew tomorrow would be pivotal. Either the detective would secure an arrest warrant and put an end to the couple's machinations, or events would spiral into a confrontation that no one wanted to imagine. Still, the hospital had weathered these days of crisis, and the sight of the child gently cradling the infant gave many hope that justice might prevail. Even the most cynical nurse or harried doctor had moments of optimism, seeing how the baby's strength grew daily and how the girl, against all odds, had fought tooth and nail to protect him. Yet a question lingered in every adult's mind. In the decisive moment, would the system do right by these two children who had no one else but each other? Bill. For now, all they could do was prepare, watch the doors, and wait for whatever the impending day might bring. The final confrontation felt like it was only a heartbeat away. The final night settled over the hospital like the calm before a storm. Everyone sensed that by sunrise, the fate of the newborn and the 10-year-old girl who had fought so bravely to protect him would be decided. The corridors felt almost hushed, as though the hospital itself was holding its breath, bracing for whatever might come. Around midnight, the detective on duty received urgent confirmation. The witness from Chicago had delivered a trove of digital files, contracts, receipts, emails, proving that the wealthy elderly couple not only financed illegal fertility procedures, but also coerced or misled young mothers into giving up their infants. According to these new documents, the old man had been particularly adamant about acquiring certain babies who might someday inherit substantial wealth through complicated familial ties. It was all the evidence the local authorities needed to request immediate arrest warrants. That same hour, a police officer ran up to the hospital director's office, where the detective, social worker, and a few staff members were poring over the files. Nearly out of breath, the officer announced that a judge had granted them a special warrant. The couple, their legal associates, and anyone else implicated could be taken into custody without further delay. A hush fell across the office. This was the green light they'd been waiting for. Finally, they could protect the child and the girl from any last-minute power plays. Yet there was a catch. No one had seen the couple all day. They had vanished from their usual haunts, and their lawyer wasn't answering phone calls. It was entirely possible they were planning a rapid escape, perhaps on a private jet. The detective immediately organized a response team, sending squad cars to the couple's estate, contacting airport security, and coordinating with the state police to cover highways leading out of the city. If the couple tried to flee, they would be intercepted. Not long after 1 a.m, an unmarked car rolled into the hospital parking lot, its occupants stepping out with an air of controlled urgency. It was a small group of officers in plain clothes, prepared to station themselves discreetly around the pediatric ward. They feared the couple might attempt a final desperate effort to seize the baby before dawn. The hospital staff locked down the main entrances, allowing only essential personnel access. Tension ratcheted up with each passing minute. Inside the pediatric ward, the girl was wide awake, cradling the newborn in her arms. One of the nurses sensed a shift in the atmosphere and gently told her that everything would be over soon. The girl looked up with searching eyes, a mix of hope and uncertainty. She had heard versions of that promise before, but this time she noticed the nurse's determined expression. Perhaps this night truly would bring the resolution she longed for. At around 2 in the morning, the phone at the main nurse's station rang. A night shift nurse picked it up and heard a man's voice snarling threats. He demanded the baby be brought outside to the parking lot if they knew what was best. The nurse, trembling, signaled for the detective. He motioned for her to keep the caller talking, but the man hung up almost immediately. Although the call was too short to trace, it confirmed their fears. The couple, or at least their associates, had not given up. Tension peaked. The detective made sure all patrols were on high alert, checking every door and window in the hospital. Moments later, the detective's phone buzzed. Another officer reported that the elderly couple's mansion was empty, their suitcases gone, and a few staff members also missing. It seemed certain they were on the move. The question was, were they headed for the hospital or the airport? Not 10 minutes later, a nurse in the security office spotted a sleek car parked in a dark corner of the lot via the CCTV feed. 2 figures emerged and quickly disappeared from view, edging toward the rear of the building. The detective didn't wait. He and several officers sprinted downstairs to intercept. Meanwhile, up on the pediatric floor, the staff readied themselves for potential danger. The social worker guided the girl and the newborn into a more secure room with extra officers stationed outside. The child's heart pounded as she realized the confrontation might be happening right then. Down in the corridors, police in plain clothes fanned out. One of them caught sight of an unfamiliar man and woman in expensive-looking coats slipping along the back hallway. The man saw the officer and froze. The woman hissed something inaudible, and they turned to flee. But within seconds, more officers surrounded them. The detective himself arrived, shining a flashlight in their faces. It was the elderly man and woman, precisely the duo who had vanished earlier in the day. The old man snarled at the detective, demanding they stand aside, insisting he had legal documents granting him custody of his grandson. Yet the detective shook his head and calmly read them their rights, announcing they were under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and multiple counts of illegal adoption practices. At first, the couple protested, threatening lawsuits, but the presence of multiple armed officers and a valid warrant left them no room to maneuver. In a final, furious outburst, the old man shouted that the child belonged to him, spouting nonsense about stolen inheritance. The detective signaled for the officers to escort both suspects to waiting squad cars. In less than 10 minutes, the hospital grounds were quiet again. When the news reached the pediatric ward, the staff let out a collective sigh of relief. The social worker, trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and elation, walked into the secure room where the girl and the newborn waited. She sat beside them and explained, in gentle terms, that the 2 people who had caused them so much fear had been taken into custody. It was over. The little girl stared in disbelief for a moment, then her eyes welled up with tears. Quietly, she asked if the baby was truly safe now. The social worker nodded, affirming that the baby would remain under state protection and receive the care he needed. There would be no more late-night threats or sudden demands for custody. Nurses, police officers, and even a few doctors who had been following the case converged in the hallway, speaking in hushed, relieved voices. Some expressed how moved they were by the girl's courage, how she had carried this newborn through the streets, refusing to surrender him to people who wished him harm. One of the officers commented that, in all his years, he had never seen such fierce devotion from someone so young. With the immediate threat contained, the morning brought fresh challenges. Now they had to plan the next steps. The baby, while improving, still needed consistent medical attention. The girl herself had no legal guardians, no family to claim her. The social worker pledged to assist, telling her that she could remain close to the baby if she wished, at least until they found a permanent, loving environment for both. Though tears still shone in the child's eyes, a hint of a smile emerged, as though she finally saw a glimmer of hope for a future without constant fear. Over the next few days, formal charges were filed against the couple. The testimony from Chicago proved damning, and the local investigation unearthed more evidence of forged adoption papers. Bail was denied due to flight risk. Media outlets caught wind of the arrests, but the hospital staff refused to divulge details, protecting the privacy of the child and the baby. As for the little girl, she lingered in the hospital even after the newborn was nearly ready for discharge. Staff arranged for her temporary shelter, and talks began about whether she and the infant might remain together under foster care if all parties agreed. In the end, the place that had once been a battleground for lies and threats transformed into a haven. The baby's eyes opened wider each day, and he cooed whenever the girl rocked him. The pediatrician observed them with a warmth she couldn't quite put into words. There was a sense that, despite all the pain and betrayal, something beautiful had taken root, the unconditional bond between two children, each saving the other in different ways. With the last nightmares dispelled, the hospital's daily routine returned to normal, albeit with an enduring memory of how far one small girl would go to rescue a life most grown-ups would have never even noticed. In her, they saw a bravery that challenged the most powerful adversaries, and though the future was still uncertain for both the girl and the newborn, everyone there believed they would thrive if kept together and loved. At last, one golden morning, the detective dropped by to say goodbye before moving on to his next assignment. He saw the girl holding the baby and paused. He gently reminded her that she'd helped bring down a criminal network, no small feat for a 10-year-old. The girl said nothing but hugged the newborn close. For her, the real victory wasn't in seeing the couple handcuffed. It was in seeing the baby safe, his tiny fingers curled around her own. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Golden Love Stories and turn on notifications so you won't miss our upcoming videos filled with moving tales, dramatic twists and heartwarming endings. We have plenty of surprises and life lessons in store, and we can't wait to share them with you. Until the next video, where even more heartfelt moments await.